few relevant lessons is what we want to get out of this story. Children of Israel had been shut out of Canaan when they refused to enter after they had sent the spies in. It seems like what happened after the matter of Dathan, Abiram, and Corey, that the children of Israel sort of split up and became nomadic. They were in different, the different tribes, or maybe a few tribes together, went off one direction, some others went in another. And meanwhile, the manna continued, and they were sustained. But the Lord, perhaps mercifully, puts a curtain over the greater part of these 38 years that they wandered in the wilderness. There's a psalm, one of these psalms, I think it's 81 or 83, where it says they wouldn't walk in the ways that the Lord chose for them, and so the Lord gave them up, speaking of Israel, to walk in their own ways. That's one of the understatements, the greatest understatements of all time, that he gave them up to walk in their own ways, because they walked for 38 years around that wilderness until they died. We know that there were 600,000 footmen when they came out of Egypt, and of those 20, they were numbered from 20 years and older, and so of those 600,000, only 2, as far as we know. Now, it may be that some of the Levites, or maybe the tribe of Levi, also did not rebel against the Lord at that time, but the only ones we're sure about are Joshua and Caleb, the only 2 that survived. Other than that, 600,000 people died in the 38 and a half years. Now, if you divide that, that's just taking into account the men. If you divide that by the amount of days in the 38 years, you'll find that they had on the average of at least 40 funerals a day amongst the tribes of Israel. And it was at that time that Moses wrote Psalm 91. Let's turn to that psalm for a moment. Do you know Moses wrote one of the Psalms? Maybe 2. But 1 for sure. Psalm 90. When you realize the circumstances under which Moses wrote this thing, it makes this psalm all the more understandable and meaningful. Lord, thou hast been our dwelling place in all generations. Before the mountains were brought forth, or ever thou hast formed the earth and the world, even from everlasting to everlasting, thou art God. Thou turnest man to destruction, and sayest, return, ye children of men. For 1,000 years in thy sight is but as yesterday, when it is past, and as a watch in the night. Thou carriest them away as with a flood. They are as asleep. In the morning they are like grass which groweth up. In the morning it flourisheth and groweth up. In the evening it is cut down and withereth. You see the relevance of this psalm in the light of the children of Israel dying out so quickly over these 38 years. For we are consumed by thine anger, and by thy wrath are we troubled. 10 times they had provoked the Lord. And finally, when they wouldn't enter in because of unbelief, as it says in Hebrews, the Lord sware in his wrath that they should not enter. And then they changed their mind. They said, oh yeah, we'll go now. And then it was too late, and then they were slaughtered. Thou hast set our iniquities before thee, our secret sins in the light of thy countenance. Now the Lord was anxious to forgive their sins, but they kept persisting in their unbelief in their sin. After they had seen so many miracles that it became impossible for the Lord to ignore their persistent rebellion and disobedience and murmuring. For all our days are passed away in thy wrath. We spend our years as a tale that is told. In other words, sentence has been passed, and our fate is sealed, and we're all bound to die before the 40 years are up. The days of our years are 70. That is, this is often used as a general statement for humanity, that the Lord has appointed us 70 years, but here in particular was applied to the children of Israel. Because it was from 20 years old and upward when they came out of Egypt, and so the great majority of them were under 70 and more than 60 by the time they died in the wilderness here, or anywhere from 20. Well, it could have been 22, I suppose, some of them. And some of them died in the plagues, and others died in the disaster when the earth opened up and swallowed up Corey and so on. But this is a sad chapter in the history of Israel, the people of God, people who had been brought out of Egypt, people who had gone through the Red Sea, who had received the law, and who had said, Moses, don't tell God, please, not to speak to us anymore. You let him speak to you, and you tell us, and we'll do anything you say. That ratified the covenant that God had given to them. They said, all that the Lord has said we will do, and we'll be obedient. They said it over and over again. And here, just a few years later, the sentence is passed on them that the whole generation is going to pass away. The same ones that God had brought out of Egypt. This is a terrific warning. a warning, a relevant warning that we need to continue in the way that the Lord has brought us. We have to walk in obedience to the commandments of the Lord Jesus, lest we be overthrown. All right, let's read a little further. All the days of our years are 70, and if by reason of strength they be 80 years, yet is their strength labor and sorrow, for it is soon cut off, and we fly away. Who knoweth the power of thine anger? Even according to thy fear, so is thy wrath. Read verse 12. This is a key verse. So teach us to number our days, that we may apply our hearts unto wisdom. We'll stop there for now. But here, I usually, the way you think of this verse is, look, you might die tomorrow, so you better live wise today, that you don't have terrible regrets for tomorrow. But I like to take this verse in a different way. Let's be wise because we might live tomorrow. And if we're going to live, we want to do something worthwhile with our lives. No matter how long we live, whether we live to 90, there's no virtue in living 90 years if those 90 years are all spent in vanity and in rebellion. But tomorrow you might live, and so let's live for God. Let's do something worthwhile, and you might live. The chances are pretty good that you're going to live the day after tomorrow yet. I hope so. I hope to see you next Sunday yet. And I don't want the class to be decimated by the destroyer, and I don't expect it to be. We pray one for another, but because we have the opportunity to live, let's do something worthwhile with our lives. Suppose we realize that we only had, as someone testified a while ago, that they, in their dream, they realized that they were about to die. And they went to the pastor. It was my father was the pastor, and said, "Pastor, how come I have to die?" And the time was up. And finally this person saw themselves laid out in their casket. Now that's a rare dream. Now, usually you escape miraculously in your dreams from the wild Indians or the Russians or whatever. But in this dream, he actually saw himself laid out in the casket, and he heard the pastor preaching a nice sermon and everything. But then when he woke up, he said to himself, "Oh, I better live for God. I better do what's right." And he determined from that time on that he was going to live more for God, make his time count more for the Lord, and do things that were worthwhile. Years ago, and when I was visiting Ulrich Jelinek after he had had his heart attack, it's the only man that I ever visited who on his deathbed, although he didn't know it was his deathbed, and he really did live another year or so, he had a heart attack. And when I visited him in the Summit Hospital, he said to me, "Bob," he said, "when I realized that I had had a heart attack and that I might die," he said, "I could honestly say to the Lord that I felt I had done what he wanted me to do with my life." And he said, I wasn't afraid. Now, I've heard other people be not afraid, but that was the best witness that I ever had from someone who was face to face with death, that they had really done what the Lord wanted them to do with their life. And I trust that the Lord will help us to so live, that we live like that when the end comes, if we're aware of it, that we'll be able to say like the Apostle Paul, "I have fought a good fight, I have kept the faith, henceforth there's laid up for me a crown of righteousness." In Numbers 20, which is our chapter for today, let's get back there before we teach this whole lesson without our text. The children of Israel came to Zin, even the whole congregation. You see, that's the fact that it states the whole congregation gives credence to the fact that perhaps they had split up and gone their separate ways. Now the whole congregation came back together in preparation for the next generation to enter into the promised land. In the month Zin, and the people abode in Kadesh. This is Numbers 20, right at the beginning. And Miriam died there and was buried there. Miriam. Now we've got to stop a moment for the funeral of Miriam. What do you know about? What do you think about when you think about Miriam? What do you think of first? A timbrel and dancer, leading the women of Israel in a praise after they had gone through the Red Sea and the Lord had destroyed the army of Pharaoh. She was a leader of the women. She's one of the few unmarried women in the Bible who is listed as a woman of faith, and she remained unmarried, and I suppose that she cared for Moses a good deal of time until his wife came along, as we noted some lesson or two ago. But Miriam was a godly woman. You also remember Miriam for her watchful care over the baby Moses. Remember when the princess came and pulled that little ark out of the river? She suggested a Hebrew nurse for the child, and she knew where to get she knew where the nursing home was. She got the right nurse for baby Moses. And the mother not only had the joy of raising her child, but getting paid for it. Now that's really living, isn't it? Well, at any rate, Miriam was famous for that. However, she also is remembered for a sin. When she with Aaron, and it was obvious that Miriam was the principal offender in that case, she spoke against Moses and started some discontent amongst the people of Israel, and saying that Moses shouldn't be so autonomous or so great, so authoritative, because God had spoken through these others also. And the Lord was displeased, called Miriam out, and then he smote her with leprosy. Moses prayed and she was immediately healed, but because of her sin she was shut out of the camp for 7 days. So we do remember Miriam's sin along the way. However, the Bible is so wonderful that way. It doesn't cover up like ancient literature whenever they're writing the story of someone. It only tells the glory side, only the heroic feats and so on, and no faults are ever revealed in the subjects of ancient biographies. But the Bible is not like that, and it's a proof again of the divine inspiration of the Word of God. So Miriam died there and was buried, and there was no water for the congregation. Now remember, this is the young congregation, and so they gathered themselves together against Moses and against Aaron. The people chode with Moses and spake, saying, Would God we had died when our brethren died before the Lord. And why have we brought up the congregation of the Lord into this wilderness, that we and our cattle should die here? And now this is sad, but it's also interesting. This is the same kind of thing that Moses had to put up with before. And the children of Israel had been shut out of the promised land, and this whole generation had died because of this very thing. They had always complained. They had always decided, we were better off when we were slaves in Egypt than being out here in this wilderness. Now we don't have any meat. Now we don't have any garlic and onions, and no deli and so on. And they were always complaining and turning back in their hearts. And Moses remembering, oh no, don't tell me this generation is going to be just like the old one and turn back again, and we're going to get shut out again. And so the Lord said to Moses, now you go and you talk to the rock, speak to the rock, and I'll give you water for this whole congregation. Moses was excited here concerning the failure of these people, and he did not sanctify the Lord before the people, and he called them a bunch of rebels, and he said, must we fetch water for you from out of this rock? And he was so worked up that instead of speaking to the rock as the Lord said he should, he took his staff and he smote the rock twice. And well, the Lord honored his faith and honored his word, and did give the water from the rock, and a gusher came out of that rock, and it satisfied the needs of Israel. But Moses had not sanctified the Lord. He hadn't given the Lord credit that the Lord was going to give them the water. He said, must we fetch water for you rebels? And he called the people of God rebels. In this case, the Lord is very patient. You don't find that the Lord was angry with the children of Israel here. That's interesting to me, because so often you read the Lord said to Moses, separate yourself from these people. I'm going to consume them. I'm going to burn them up, and I'll start over with you. I'll make of you a great nation. And Moses would always say, no, Lord, you can't do that. The children of Egypt will hear about it, and they'll say you weren't able to bring it. And he would always intercede and turn God's wrath away. In this case, God is not angry. I had to think when I wrote this lesson years ago, why was God not angry with the children of Israel? You got any ideas? What do you think? God expects more of those that have had experience and seen great wonders and so on. There's a responsibility that comes with experience and with participation in some of the great things of God. And this was a new generation. The Lord doesn't expect as much of a newborn Christian as he does of someone who's been on the way a long time and had opportunity to be filled with the Spirit and to appropriate the grace of God so that they can live godly, overcoming lives. The grace of God is over the long term is meant to bring to us power for obedience. Unfortunately, the word grace today is used, and like Brother Jacobs was talking about buzzwords, grace is a buzzword among fundamentals that is horribly abused. They sing the beautiful hymn, Amazing Grace, and it is a beautiful hymn, but they think of this amazing grace as a big whitewash brush that covers up all wickedness, adultery, and thievery, and dishonesty, and all kinds of wickedness and temper and whatnot, all the grace, and they sing about the amazing, isn't it wonderful, I don't have to worry about being so wicked and so on. The amazing grace is, oh, come on, please. That kind of a cheap grace is a travesty of the gospel. The gospel grace brings us power, the power of the living Christ, the resurrected Son of God, so that we can overcome. In the places where we have been overcome, where we have failed, where we have been weak, we can be triumphant and we can be strengthened. The power of the gospel is a power that brings strength. It brings strength for obedience into our lives. And so the younger generation God was patient with them. And I think we can learn from that too, to be patient with the young folks and believe the Lord that we weren't made perfect in one day, were we? Or were we? Have we been? Or do we still have? We're still in process here. We heard that about process before. I think we still have some process to go. Sanctification is a process, and the Lord's working on us. We're not finished yet. No, we're not perfect. We're not finished. But God wants us to be patient with those who are being saved, with new Christians especially. Sometimes those have been saved for 40 years. When a new one comes in, they look down their nose at them with a super holiness and think of what a far way they have to go and how unlikely it is that they're ever going to make it. And that's a shame. That's a shame. If they were dependent on themselves, it would be highly unlikely. But the same grace that works in one to make a saint, that worked in Paul, can work in anyone who will come and trust the Lord. So God was patient with these young people. Now there's another wonderful thing in this chapter. It has to do with the death of Aaron. Aaron also died here. Yes?
I have a question, Brother Bob. Did Miriam and Aaron die before they got in?
Yes.
All because of that, when Miriam had murmured that time?
Well, I don't know particularly that it was because of that. It was because of their age, I think, for one thing. They were...
Moses was older than all of them.
No, he wasn't. Moses was younger than both of them. Moses was younger than both of them. So they were just a little bit older, and they both lived well over 100 years. So you can't say that they died unnaturally.
That wasn't the reason?
I wouldn't say it wasn't the reason either, because even with Moses, the reason the Lord gave for not allowing Moses to enter the promised land but to die before was because he did not sanctify the Lord before the people here. And I think it does say in one place that they died for their transgression, Aaron and Moses at least. In Moses' case, which we'll have later on, Moses died and was buried by God, and boy, you're in good shape when you have God for your undertaker. But Aaron here, with the story of Aaron, this is one of the most beautiful, beautiful pictures in the Bible. The Lord told Moses, and he called them out, and he told Moses and Aaron, it's time for Aaron to be gathered to his people, to be taken to his reward, in other words. I like the way the Lord did this here. He didn't just tell Moses, I'm going to tell you a secret here. Aaron's going to die. Don't tell him, but he's going to die. I like the way the Lord did this. He called Aaron and Moses and said, it's time for Aaron to be gathered to his people. No word of protest from Aaron. He was willing. His time was up. And, I think if God had his way, when it came time for the end for some people, for Christians, that the Lord would like them to be aware that the end was coming, that he was going to call them home. Somehow we have such a fear of the grim reaper, we don't see that it's a homegoing. We think of it as the most horrible and terrible thing that ever happens, and it is if it's without Christ. But there comes a time when our work is finished and the Lord's reward is ready, and the place that he's prepared is ready for us, and then it becomes glory to be with the Lord. And so God told Moses and Aaron, it's time for Aaron to be taken. Now get Eleazar, the oldest son of Aaron, and come on up the mountain. What a picture. Aaron comes out with all his priestly garments on, just as the Lord gave instruction, with the mitre on his head and the breastplate and the ephod and all the linen, the curious girdle and all the stones and so on. He comes out with the whole thing, and off they go. Now imagine, these are two old men, pretty near 120 years old, going mountain climbing, and taking Sonny along here, 78 years old. Up the mountain they go, climbing, and they get out of sight of Israel, and then the Lord speaks to Moses and says, take the garments from Aaron and place them upon Eleazar. And so they had a change of clothes up there on the mountain someplace. And Eleazar now takes the priestly garments, the high priestly garments. And of course the Lord pulls the shades or closes the Venetian blinds, and we don't know exactly how this all happened. But Aaron died. Aaron went to his reward, and he was buried there. Moses and Eleazar perhaps buried him on the mountain. And then Moses and Eleazar come back down from the mountain. Can you imagine being in that congregation and seeing this whole thing? Aaron going up. Now, Aaron didn't have a perfect record. You know, his weakness at the golden calf, and he was a little bit weak. He was no Moses, but he had served faithfully. And in the Psalms, we read of Aaron, the saint of the Lord. Now, if I was writing the Psalms, I never would have called him a saint. I would have called him the good priest or something of that nature, but the saint, I don't know that I would have called him the saint. But the Holy Spirit calls him a saint. Aaron, the saint of the Lord. And so he went up, and the people watched, and he had been their priest, their pastor, for all these years, close to 40 years. And now, when Moses comes back, he comes back without Aaron. And here comes Eleazar, dressed in the garments. Now Eleazar, the son of the high priest, is the high priest, and he carries on the function, and the transition is smooth, but they stop and they mourn for Aaron for 30 days. Now, certainly, the Lord wants us to be prepared. And I think the fact that Aaron had no protest, oh Lord, give me another 40 years and I promise I'll do better. I think that's a lot of what we hear when people feel that they might die. Regrets. Oh, if only I had my life to live over, I would do so differently. If only this and only that. I think we ought to so live in obedience to the Lord and in His presence that we have no regrets. Now, obviously, all of us could have done better. But it's good to get over these vain regrets and say, Lord, from this day, I want to do what's pleasing to you now, today, this hour, and the next hour, and moment by moment. Know what's pleasing to the Lord. Know how to please the Lord. And not have a whole list of regrets that outnumber the blessings of our lives. Let's so live that when the time comes for us, first of all, that perhaps the Lord might be able to show us that the time is drawing near. Of a number of the old-time Pentecostal leaders I've read in going over Brother Gardner's stories and so on, a number of them were made aware by the Lord before their time came that it was coming, that the Lord was going to call them home. They knew it was coming. One story that I read, a man came to his wife, and he said, I have something to tell you, and it's not easy for me to tell you. And so he said, you pray that the Lord will give you grace, and I'm going to speak to you maybe tomorrow, and so on. So in the meanwhile, the Lord showed the woman also that He was going to take her husband. And so when he came to tell her that the Lord had showed him that he was going to be taken home to glory, she stopped him and she said, yeah, the Lord has showed me too. You don't have to tell me. I know it. I know it. Well, that was, needless to say, that was a glorious homegoing for that man who had finished his work and done the job that the Lord had given him to do and had passed the torch on to someone else. Let's believe the Lord that we won't have a lot of regrets when we come to the end of the way, but that we'll be able to say, I have fought a good fight. I have kept the faith. I have finished my course. Henceforth there's laid up a crown of righteousness for me, and not for me only, but for all them also, which love is appearing. And that's what the Apostle Paul said, and Jesus said, I have finished the work which thou gavest me to do. The words which thou gavest me, I have given them. The men which you gave me, I've kept. None of them is lost except the son of perdition, speaking of Judas, but they've been kept. And may we also fulfill the jobs, the call that God has had over our lives, do the thing for our family, for our loved ones, for our neighbors, for our fellow workers that the Lord wants us to do. And if He has a ministry for us, that we have faithfully discharged that ministry, whatever it may be, that when we come to the end of the way, we might not say, oh, please, Lord, give me another chance, let me do it over, but that we may be able to say, by your grace, Lord, I have been enabled to do what you've given me to do. Let's so live. That's how we should apply our hearts unto wisdom. Teach us to number our days that we may apply our hearts to wisdom. Thank you for your attention.